It's 9:47 on a Tuesday, and her phone lights up on the arm of the couch. You don't even look. You already know. There's a particular rhythm to the way she picks it up. Quick, unbothered, the thumb already moving before the screen is fully awake. There's a particular half smile she makes at a text that isn't from you. And there's a name on that screen you've come to know better than some of your own relatives. It's him, the ex, the father, the one who got the first version of her, the wedding version, the version who thought it would last forever. You love her. That part is real, and it's also the part that makes this so exhausting. Because loving her means loving the whole arrangement. The custody calendar magneted to the fridge, the second toothbrush, the man who will be at every graduation, every wedding, every hospital waiting room for the rest of your natural life. You didn't just fall for a person. You joined a system that was already running before you got here, and nobody's handing you the manual. 1. The ghost with custody. The first thing you learn is that the ex is never actually gone. He is a permanent installation. He is load-bearing. You can redecorate the entire relationship around him, but you cannot remove him because he comes attached to the two small humans she would walk into traffic for. And this is more ordinary than it feels at 9:47 on a Tuesday. Roughly 17% of US children under 18 live in a blended family that includes a step-parent, step-siblings, or half-siblings, and 42% of American adults now have at least one step-relative. You are not a strange case. You are a demographic. Somewhere around 114.5 million Americans are part of a step relationship, which means there is a vast, silent army of people who also hear that phone buzz and pretend to keep watching the show. But statistics don't sleep next to you. What you actually live with is smaller and stranger. The fact that a man you've maybe shaken hands with twice knows what your partner is having for dinner, because she told him, because he asked about the kids, because that's how they do it. He has access, not to her heart, you tell yourself, just to her Tuesdays, her Wednesdays, her every single day. You wanted a relationship. What you got was a relationship with a standing guest who never leaves and never quite arrives. 2. What everyone else sees. From the outside, this is the good version. This is the enlightened divorce, the co-parenting success story, the thing people post about with a sunset filter, and the caption, "Grateful we still put the kids first." And they're not wrong exactly. The research is genuinely on their side. Co-parents who keep their communication focused on the children tend to experience fewer conflicts, and children in blended families do better with consistency, stability, and low conflict between their parents. Every family therapist alive will tell you that a warm, functional relationship between exes is a gift to the kids. Dr. Jan Blackstone, who has written 6 books on this exact subject, would tell her she's doing it right. So at the barbecue, when someone finds out you're dating a mom who co-parents beautifully with her ex, they nod like you've won something. That's so mature. That's so healthy. You're so lucky she's not one of those bitter ones. You smile. You agree. You are, in fact, lucky. And also, nobody at the barbecue has to lie in bed at 11 p.m. while the two of them work out the logistics of a dentist appointment over text with a warmth that has 3 years of marriage baked into it. Nobody else has to feel grateful and invisible in the same breath. The healthy version has a cost that doesn't show up in any of the sunset photos. You are the price of everyone else's stability. You are the adult who agreed to feel a little bit like a guest so that 2 children could feel completely at home. Mature is just a word for the ache you're not allowed to complain about. 3. The phone that glows at 9 p.m. Here is the ritual nobody warned you about. The phone glows. She reads. She replies. Sometimes she laughs. Sometimes she sighs and says, "He's impossible," which is somehow worse because it means she's still emotionally invested enough to be annoyed. You start doing arithmetic you're ashamed of. How many texts today? Was that a co-parenting text or a "how was your day" text? There's a line, and you can feel it, but you can't prove it. Experts will tell you that emergencies aside, there's rarely a need for co-parents to communicate more than once a day, that a good message sums up what needs summing up and lets everyone go back to their lives. That's the theory. In practice, you're watching the 4th thread of the evening about whether the 7-year-old liked the new lunchbox. You are not alone in the arithmetic. On co-parenting forums, new partners describe this exact quiet math. One writes about the nightly FaceTimes the child isn't even interested in, and the near-daily texts over small things that don't really need to be communicated. "It's nice that they can communicate so well," she says, "but when is it too much?" Another, a full year into her relationship, finally admitted she was uncomfortable that her partner and his ex were still signing off their texts with little kisses, out of habit on his side at least. When is it too much? That's the question that has no answer, because the moment you ask it out loud, you become the problem, the jealous one, the insecure one, the one who can't handle a healthy co-parenting relationship. So you don't ask. You just learn the exact shade of blue that phone screen makes in a dark room. 4. The rules you were never told. Every relationship has rules. This one has a second, secret rule book, written in invisible ink, that you are somehow expected to have memorized on day 1. Rule 1. The ex has diplomatic immunity. He can text at odd hours, cancel his weekend last minute, show up late for the handoff, and you are to absorb it with the serenity of a man who has made peace with things he cannot change. Rule 2. Any feeling you have about the ex is, by default, an overreaction, unless and until she independently decides he's being unreasonable, at which point you are allowed to agree, briefly, and then drop it. Rule 3, the big one. You do not touch the phone. You do not read over the shoulder. You do not ask, "Who's that?" in a tone. You have surrendered your right to the tone. What makes this maddening is that the experts don't even fully agree on where the line is, so how are you supposed to find it in the dark? Research suggests that partners in blended families report higher relationship satisfaction when they feel like a priority rather than an afterthought, which sounds like it's on your side. But other studies find that overly strict boundaries, like forbidding all non-essential contact with an ex, actually increase stress instead of relieving it. So you're threading a needle between, "I'd like to feel like the main character in my own relationship," and "I refuse to become the controlling partner who blew up a functional family over a lunchbox text." There are, researchers say, whole different styles of co-parenting: cooperative ones with frequent friendly contact, and colder, parallel ones with as little interaction as possible. Nobody asked which one you were auditioning for. You just showed up and discovered she and her ex were the cooperative kind, the kind that texts, the warm kind, the kind everyone congratulates. You learn the rules the way you learn a new city's traffic laws, by getting honked at. 5. The villain in the group chat. Here's the trap, and it's a beautiful one, engineered so precisely that no one even had to design it. You cannot object because it's about the children. Every single text has a child-shaped alibi. Every call can be justified. Pickup times, fevers, permission slips, the school play, the thing the teacher said, the shoes that don't fit anymore. The kids are real, their needs are real, and that means any discomfort you raise gets weighed against a 7-year-old's well-being, a fight you will lose every time, and should lose, which is what makes it so airtight. A co-parenting coach named Betsy Ross once put words to the thing you can't quite name. A new partner, she explained, might feel left out of the deep emotional connection that still exists between their partner and their ex. And the co-parenting itself can serve as an inadvertent, but frequent, painful reminder of the whole life that existed before you arrived. Not the fights, not the divorce, the life, the mortgage they picked together, the inside joke about her mother, the birth stories you weren't in the room for. Say that out loud, though, and listen to how it sounds. I feel weird that you have a history with the father of your children. You'd be laughed out of your own kitchen, and rightly so. So you file it. You become fluent in the language of the reasonable partner. "No, it's fine. Go ahead and call him." "No, of course he can come to the recital." "No, I'm not upset. I'm just tired." You are not tired. You are performing a citizenship you never applied for, in a country where the ex holds a passport, and you hold a visa that requires constant renewal. And the cruelest part is that being the villain would at least be a role with lines. Instead, you get to be the understanding one, the most silent character in the whole production. The bad guy at least gets to speak. You just get to nod. 6. The resentment you keep in a drawer. Resentment in this kind of relationship doesn't arrive as a storm. It arrives as sediment. A little settles every time the phone glows, every time a plan bends around his schedule, every time she says "we" and means her and him and the kids. The original "we", the one that predates you. You'd never say it, so it comes out sideways. As a joke, usually. Should I set him a place at the table? You crack, and everyone laughs, and only you know it wasn't entirely a joke. Resentment disguised as humor is the house wine of blended families. You can drink it for years and call it lighthearted. On the forums where people finally say the quiet part, it's less funny. One stepmother wrote something that lands like a slap. She felt like the ex got the best parts of her partner and left her the scraps: the marriage, the kids, the house he designed, the car, and a nice monthly child support withdrawal as a recurring reminder. That's the fear underneath the drawer. Not that your partner will leave, that you arrived after the main event and inherited the cleanup, the tired years, the split custody weekends, the version of her that's already given her wildest, most unguarded love to a family that isn't the one she's building with you. None of that is fair to her, and you know it. She didn't fail by having a past. The kids aren't luggage. The ex isn't a rival, most days. But resentment doesn't care about fair. It's not an argument, it's a weather system. And you've gotten very good at checking the forecast privately, smiling through it, and telling yourself it'll pass. It does pass. Then it comes back Tuesday at 9:47, right on schedule. 7. Why you stay? You could leave. People do. Some new partners take one look at the standing appointment with the ex and decide the whole system is too crowded to build a life inside. That's not weakness, that's math. But you stay, and it's worth being honest about why. Because the reasons are better than resentment lets you admit at 9:47 on a Tuesday. You stay because she chose this, chose you, with full knowledge of how complicated she came. She's not hiding a life, she's showing you the whole thing, custody calendar and all. Most divorced women remarry, the majority build a second act with someone new, and she picked you to be it. That's not a consolation prize, that's a woman who already knows exactly how a marriage can end, and decided to try the whole terrifying thing again. With you, eyes open. You stay because the daily texts you resent are also the texts of a person who finishes what she starts with the people she loves. The loyalty that keeps her tethered to her kid's father is the same loyalty that will keep her tethered to you when things get hard. And things always get hard. You can't admire the devotion and resent its earlier draft. It's one trait. It doesn't come in pieces. And you stay because, on the good days, you can feel the shape of what you're actually building. Not the sunset filter version, the real one. The kid who started saving you the blue popsicle without being asked. The night she reached for your hand after dealing with him, not instead of. The slow, unglamorous accumulation of a family that no one had to congratulate, because it just quietly became yours. The phone still glows. You've just stopped needing it to go dark to feel chosen. 8. What it makes of you. Here's what nobody tells you about loving a co-parent. It doesn't just change your Tuesdays. Over time, it changes you. You become patient in a way you weren't before, not saintly, just weathered smooth, like a stone in a river that stopped fighting the current sometime last year. You learn to hold a feeling without acting on it, which is either emotional maturity or quiet self-erasure. And the honest answer is, it's usually both at once. You get very good at the difference between a boundary worth defending and a jealousy worth ignoring, and you'll be wrong about which is which more often than you'd like. You also lose a certain fantasy, the one where you were going to be someone's whole world, the uncontested center, the only history that matters. That version of love was never real anyway. It just took a man texting your partner about a lunchbox to prove it. Everybody arrives somewhere in the middle of someone else's story. She just made hers visible instead of pretending the previous chapters got torched. The quiet truth is that the daily text was never really the problem. The problem was wanting to be the only person she needed in a life she deliberately built to need more than one. Loving a co-parent means loving someone who is, by definition, not fully yours. And discovering that not fully yours is how it works for everyone, in every relationship. And most people just never have to see the receipts. You gotta see the receipts. It's uncomfortable. It might also be the least diluted love you've ever been in. So you stop waiting for the phone to stop glowing. You make the coffee. You learn the ex's coffee order too, eventually, because that's who you are now. And somewhere between the custody calendar and the popsicle in the freezer, you realize the thing nobody at the barbecue will ever say out loud, that the most grown-up love isn't the one with no one else in the frame. It's the one where you finally accept that a heart big enough to keep loving her kid's father every single day is exactly the size of heart you wanted pointed at you in the first place. You just have to share it. Everyone does. Most people are only lucky enough to find out the hard way.